It was a crisp, late afternoon in October 1963 when 11-year-old Tommy Miller went missing. The small Ohio town was quiet, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and doors were rarely locked. Tommy, a bright and curious boy with a shock of sandy hair and a mischievous grin, had been playing in his backyard, tossing a baseball against the fence. His mother, busy preparing dinner in the kitchen, called his name several times, but the yard was empty when she looked outside. The swing in the corner creaked in the wind, but there was no sign of Tommy. Panic started to set in almost immediately. Neighbors came out to help, scanning the rows of neatly trimmed lawns and the narrow alleys that ran between houses. They shouted his name, checked the nearby woods, and even peered into the small creek that cut through the edge of town. Some neighbors remembered seeing a strange car parked on the street earlier that day, but by the time anyone investigated, it was gone. The community's fear began to grow. Rumors spread quickly. Had Tommy wandered off? Was he taken? The unanswered questions gnawed at everyone, leaving a sense of unease that lingered long after the sun dipped below the horizon. The local police were called immediately, and within hours, the town was buzzing with urgency. Officers interviewed friends, classmates, and anyone who might have seen something unusual. They retraced Tommy's steps, asking about the baseball he had been playing with, the street he might have wandered down, even the neighbors' pets who had been roaming the yard. Despite their efforts, every lead seemed to vanish into thin air. The boy's disappearance was sudden, inexplicable, and terrifying in its mystery. For a town so small and tight-knit, the idea that someone, or something, could vanish without a trace was almost unthinkable. As the hours stretched into night, the search became frantic. Flashlights pierced the darkness, casting long shadows across the yards and fences. Parents held their children closer, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even to themselves. The local radio station began broadcasting alerts, asking anyone with information to call in. Volunteers combed the surrounding fields and woods, but every corner they turned seemed to lead to more questions than answers. It was as if Tommy had simply disappeared into thin air, leaving nothing behind but the faint echoes of laughter that once filled the yard. By the time the town reluctantly called off the initial search, a heavy sense of dread had settled over the community. Families closed their windows, doors, and hearts, unsure if they would ever see Tommy again. Local newspapers ran the story for days, featuring his photo on front pages, pleading for tips, and sharing every detail known about the boy and his last known movements. Even strangers passing through the town felt the tension, sensing that this was not just a missing child, it was a mystery that would haunt the town for years. And though search parties had scoured every inch, nothing, not a clue, not a footprint, not a whisper, hinted at where Tommy had gone. Days turned into weeks, and the once frantic energy of the town slowly gave way to a haunting, lingering anxiety. Police reports were filed meticulously, detectives revisited the neighborhood, and search dogs combed the nearby woods, but every lead dissolved into dead ends. Each potential witness brought forth new stories, yet none provided concrete answers. Theories began circulating. Maybe Tommy had wandered off and gotten lost. Perhaps he had been kidnapped, or worse, maybe something unthinkable had happened in those quiet streets. Still, nothing could explain the complete absence of evidence. Months passed, and the case began to weigh heavily on everyone involved. The Miller family refused to give up hope, yet even they started feeling the crushing pressure of time. Their home, once filled with laughter and life, now echoed with silence. Posters bearing Tommy's smiling face covered telephone poles and store windows throughout the town, a constant reminder of the boy who had vanished. Local children whispered about him in schoolyards, mixing fear with fascination, while adults avoided talking too much, afraid of stirring up old wounds. The law enforcement team tried everything they could think of, door-to-door interviews, following every tip, checking the nearby rivers and abandoned barns. But the investigation produced nothing tangible. Authorities even reached out to neighboring towns, questioning transient workers, strangers passing through, and anyone who might have seen something unusual that day. Yet every lead ended the same way, a blank wall, a series of questions with no answers. The frustration was palpable, and the case slowly started to fade from headlines, replaced by newer stories, though it never left the memories of those who lived through it. As the search dwindled, rumors began to creep in from the shadows. Some claimed to have seen Tommy in distant towns or even out of state, while others whispered darker possibilities, claims of secret hideouts or someone within the town being involved. But with no evidence, these whispers remained just that, whispers. Detectives documented the accounts carefully, but frustration grew. The inability to locate the boy gnawed at the investigators, leaving them restless and haunted. Night after night, they replayed interviews, reviewed old photographs, and walked the streets they had searched so many times before, hoping some clue would reveal itself. By the time a year had passed, the investigation was officially labeled cold. The case files, once piled high on desks in the sheriff's office, were stored away in dusty cabinets, seemingly forgotten by most, but never by Tommy's parents or the few officers who had dedicated their lives to the boy's search. The town itself changed subtly. The air seemed heavier, and every lost object, every unexplained noise, reminded residents of the unanswered questions. Tommy's disappearance became a haunting story whispered at night, a scar in the town's memory, and a chilling reminder that sometimes, even in a small, quiet community, a child could vanish without a trace. As the years passed, the story of Tommy Miller's disappearance settled into the town's collective memory like a dark shadow. By the late 1970s, the town had grown, but the old houses on Elm Street still held a sense of unease. Among them, one particular house began to attract attention. Neighbors whispered about it quietly, saying the windows seemed to watch anyone who passed by, and sometimes, when the wind howled through the trees, faint scratching noises could be heard from inside. It was the kind of house kids dared each other to approach but never actually entered. The mere mention of it made even adults glance nervously toward Elm Street when they walked past. Stories began to circulate, sometimes told in hushed tones, sometimes shouted over fences in disbelief. Some claimed to see shadows moving behind the dusty curtains late at night. Others swore they heard a child crying, muffled and sorrowful, echoing through the old, empty halls. Local children, drawn by curiosity and bravado, would sneak near the property at dusk, daring one another to peer into the attic window. Each time, they came back pale-faced, claiming the shadows seemed too real, the cries too human, and the air inside too heavy, almost suffocating. Even those who dismissed it as imagination couldn't ignore the eerie feeling that clung to the house like a second skin. Adults, too, began noticing strange occurrences. Mailboxes tipped over for no reason, tools vanished from garages, and unexplained noises echoed through the neighborhood at night. The town started to link these odd events to the old house, though no one could explain why. Some older residents, those who remembered the Miller family and Tommy's disappearance, became convinced that the house held a secret, perhaps even connected to the boy's vanishing. Yet, there was no proof, only the persistent feeling that something unseen lingered, watching, waiting, and refusing to be discovered. As time went on, the legend grew. People from neighboring towns even came by, curious about the stories, and occasionally, local reporters would revisit the mystery. Each retelling added new details, some plausible, some chillingly bizarre, but all agreed on one thing. The house had an aura of menace, and the attic, in particular, was said to hold a secret no one dared uncover. Children spoke of glimpses of a small figure at the window or a fleeting shadow darting behind the drapes, and some adults claimed to have woken in the night, hearing faint tapping or whispered words that couldn't be explained. It was as if the house itself refused to release its secrets. Despite the fear and the warnings, the story of the haunted attic never faded. Instead, it embedded itself into the town's identity. The house became a symbol of the unknown, a place where the past clung stubbornly to the present, and where the memory of a boy lost decades earlier refused to be silenced. Conversations in diners, grocery stores, and schoolyards often returned to the same question. What truly happened to Tommy Miller? And more importantly, what, if anything, remained hidden inside that dusty, foreboding attic? Fast forward to 2023, and the once-feared house on Elm Street had been standing empty for decades, its paint peeling, windows fogged, and roof sagging under the weight of years. It had passed through a string of owners who either abandoned it or sold it quickly, unable to bear the unsettling atmosphere. Then, a young couple from Columbus, eager to restore a piece of local history, purchased the property at a surprisingly low price. They were unaware of the house's dark reputation, or perhaps they dismissed the stories as the exaggerated tales of small-town gossip. Excited and ambitious, they saw a fix-upper opportunity, imagining the house as a charming project rather than a place of fear. The first few days were uneventful, but as soon as they began clearing debris and peeling away decades of neglect, strange details started to emerge. Floorboards creaked unnaturally, walls bore scratches and marks that seemed oddly deliberate, and the attic, once an afterthought in their plans, stood out as unusually cold and unwelcoming. Boxes and furniture left behind by prior owners seemed to have been carefully moved or hidden. It was as if someone had been meticulous about what they wanted to keep hidden and what they wanted to erase. Even the couple, who considered themselves practical and rational, felt a subtle unease creeping into their workdays. Curiosity soon overpowered caution. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the dusty floors, the couple ventured into the attic with flashlights. The space was cramped, filled with old trunks, cobwebs, and layers of dust that had accumulated over generations. As they inspected the floorboards, they noticed that some sections didn't align perfectly with the rest, slightly warped, slightly elevated, almost as if they had been tampered with. A faint smell of mildew mixed with something else, something metallic and old, hung in the air, making their skin tingle. It was one of those moments where instinct screamed at them to leave, but human curiosity refused to back down. As they lifted one of the uneven floorboards, they discovered what appeared to be a small, hidden compartment. It was the kind of secret space meant to be overlooked, tucked neatly into the attic's corner, almost invisible to the casual observer. The compartment wasn't large, but it was enough to hold something significant. A cold draft seemed to escape from it, carrying an almost tangible sense of anticipation. The couple exchanged nervous glances, their excitement mingling with an unmistakable fear. Whatever had been hidden here was old, important, and long forgotten, and it might finally tell a story that had haunted the town for 60 years. Even as they worked to carefully remove items from the compartment, the house seemed to respond. The creaking intensified, shadows shifted, and a faint tapping echoed somewhere deep within the attic walls. It was as if the house itself was aware of the intrusion, watching the unearthing of secrets it had protected for decades. Every object they uncovered, a dusty trunk, old books, and cracked jars, felt like a breadcrumb leading them deeper into a mystery no one had dared to solve. And amid all the ordinary objects, there was the unmistakable sense that they were on the verge of discovering something far darker, far more personal, and far more chilling than they could have ever imagined. It was late one evening when the couple, flashlights cutting through the dusty darkness, finally lifted the last of the warped floorboards in the attic. Their hands shook slightly, not just from the effort, but from the eerie feeling that had settled over the space. That's when they saw it, a small, faded black and white photograph wedged into a crack between the boards. The image was unmistakable, a young boy, smiling shyly at the camera, clutching a small toy in his hands. The date scribbled on the back read 1963. Their hearts raced as the realization hit. They were looking at Tommy Miller, the boy who had vanished 60 years ago, whose story had haunted the town for decades, was staring back at them from the photograph. As they turned the photo over, a folded, crumpled note fell from its hiding place. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike, yet chillingly deliberate. It read, "He'll always stay hidden where no one will look." The couple froze. The words seemed to echo off the attic walls, mingling with the shadows that clung to every corner. An icy draft swept across the floor, stirring dust into the beam of their flashlights. The attic, once just an old storage space, suddenly felt alive, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone to uncover its secret. Every creak of the old beams sounded like a whisper, warning them that they had crossed a line that perhaps should never have been crossed. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, they continued examining the attic. It didn't take long before they noticed an unusual seam in the floorboards, almost hidden beneath layers of dust and debris. Sliding a crowbar gently under the boards revealed a tiny compartment that had clearly been overlooked for decades. Inside were personal belongings that made their stomachs turn, a worn lunchbox, small shoes, and an old, leather-bound diary. Everything was coated in decades of dust, yet astonishingly preserved. It was as if time itself had stopped in that small, secret space, freezing the final moments of a boy who had disappeared so tragically. The diary, fragile but legible, contained entries that immediately set their hearts pounding. The boy wrote about strangers who watched him from a distance, about secret meetings and hidden places, and most chillingly, about someone he trusted who kept him confined in fear. The writing was fragmented, incomplete, but it painted a picture of terror that had been silenced for 60 years. Each line they read seemed to resonate in the attic, amplifying the oppressive atmosphere around them. It became clear that Tommy's disappearance had not been random. It had been deliberate, orchestrated by someone who wanted him hidden, forgotten, and unreachable. As the couple carefully documented and photographed everything, they realized the gravity of their discovery. This wasn't just an attic full of old relics. It was a time capsule of fear, mystery, and tragedy. Every object, every note, every word in the diary was a piece of a puzzle that had confounded the town for generations. The photograph, the note, and the hidden compartment weren't just shocking. They were a direct link to the boy's final, secret days. For the first time in 6 decades, someone had found tangible proof that Tommy Miller had never truly vanished. He had been hidden, protected, and trapped in the very town that had spent years searching for him. As soon as the couple realized the significance of what they had found, they carefully examined the diary and the items inside the hidden compartment. Each page of the diary was yellowed and brittle, but the words were clear, written in Tommy's small, precise handwriting. He described his days in fear, watching unknown men loiter near his house, and hearing whispers in the night that made him tremble. Some entries were just fragments, half-sentences scrawled in panic, but the sense of dread that permeated each line was unmistakable. It painted a chilling picture. Tommy had been trapped somewhere, unseen yet always aware of looming danger. The more they read, the clearer it became that Tommy had attempted to leave clues for anyone who might find him. Notes about hiding places, scraps of paper listing names, and subtle hints about secret compartments suggested he knew he was being watched and was desperate for someone to uncover his story. One passage in particular caught their attention. "If I disappear, they will never look here. Only the brave will find me." The couple exchanged tense glances. The attic itself, the very space they stood in, was not just storage. It was the silent witness to decades of secrecy. Every creak of the old beams seemed to reinforce the sense that the house was alive with memory, holding on to what had been hidden for far too long. Among the items, the old lunchbox and tiny shoes struck an emotional chord. They weren't just objects. They were remnants of a boy's life abruptly halted. The shoes, worn and small, seemed almost to whisper Tommy's presence, frozen in time. The lunchbox, dented and rusted, still carried faint traces of food wrappers, a silent echo of the daily routine he had once followed. The couple felt a mix of awe and horror. They were holding evidence that connected a child to the place where he had vanished, tangible proof that the mystery which had haunted an entire town was real and tragically intimate. The diary also contained disturbing details about who might have been involved in Tommy's disappearance. Names were mentioned in passing, people who seemed familiar in the town's memory, along with cryptic references to keeping him safe and making sure no one finds him. While incomplete, the writings suggested a deliberate effort to conceal the boy, not just from the town, but from the world. The couple realized the diary wasn't merely a relic. It was a confession, a record of fear, and a warning that the truth had been deliberately hidden for decades. Every page turned revealed more about the boy's struggle to survive while unseen, and the enormity of the cover-up became increasingly clear. By the time the couple finished cataloging the items, they understood that they were holding the key to a mystery that had baffled generations. Each artifact, every sentence in the diary, and the very photograph they had found pointed to the undeniable reality. Tommy had not wandered off, he had not run away, and he had not been forgotten by fate. Someone had hidden him, and in doing so, had ensured that the town would spend decades haunted by the unanswered question of his disappearance. For the first time, the story was no longer just rumor or legend. It was evidence, preserved in a dusty attic, waiting for the world to finally understand the horrifying truth. Word of the attic discovery spread like wildfire through the town. News crews arrived from across the state, their cameras capturing the once-forgotten house in all its decayed glory. Locals, many of whom had grown up hearing the story of Tommy Miller, gathered cautiously outside the property, whispering among themselves. Some were skeptical, fearing another dead-end or overhyped story, while others felt an icy chill as memories of that long-ago October resurfaced. The town hadn't known closure in 60 years, and now, with evidence literally unearthed from the attic, the reality of what had happened was finally creeping into public consciousness. Authorities quickly secured the attic and began examining the evidence. Forensic teams catalogued the diary, photograph, and personal items, carefully analyzing the compartments and floorboards that had hidden them for decades. DNA tests were requested, experts consulted, and historians documented every detail. Even the couple who discovered the items were called back repeatedly, interviewed under flashing lights, and asked to recount every moment of their discovery. The tension was almost unbearable. The town held its breath, knowing that this might finally answer questions that had haunted generations. As the results came in, the horror and grief became palpable. DNA confirmed what many feared yet secretly hoped wasn't true. The remains and personal items belonged to Tommy Miller. The boy who had vanished so mysteriously 60 years ago had never left the town. He had been hidden in plain sight, protected yet forgotten, trapped within the walls of a house that had long held its secret close. Families who had grown up alongside Tommy, neighbors who had once searched tirelessly, and even strangers who had heard the story were struck by disbelief, shock, and sorrow. The truth was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The town grappled with the implications. How could a child vanish and remain hidden in a familiar home without anyone realizing? Questions swirled. Was it neglect? Malice? A deliberate conspiracy? The diary provided fragments, hints of people involved in a story of fear and secrecy, but many answers remained buried in the past. Conversations in diners, grocery stores, and church basements turned to hushed speculation, as everyone tried to piece together the decades of mystery. The collective memory of the town, long shadowed by Tommy's disappearance, was now forced to confront a painful reality that had been lurking just out of sight for generations. Yet amidst the shock and grief, there was also a sense of closure. For the first time, people could stop wondering where Tommy had gone. He had been found. The evidence allowed families, neighbors, and even former investigators to finally reconcile with the past. Though the horror of what had been uncovered remained, there was a fragile relief in knowing the truth. The attic, once just a dusty, neglected space, had become the key to unraveling a decades-long mystery, forcing the town to confront both the darkness of human secrecy and the enduring power of a child's story that refused to be forgotten. As the town slowly came to terms with the discovery, one thing became painfully clear. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, no matter how much time passes. Tommy Miller's story, hidden for 60 years in the shadows of that dusty attic, reminds us that the past has a way of reaching into the present. Every creak of an old floorboard, every shadow in a quiet corner, could be a whisper from history, warning us, haunting us, or demanding to be remembered. Though the mystery is now solved, the feeling of unease lingers. The house on Elm Street still stands, silent yet watchful, as if it knows it has revealed its darkest secret but might still be hiding more than anyone can imagine. And for the town, for the families, and for anyone who hears this story, the chilling truth remains. Sometimes the ones we lose are closer than we ever dared to think, waiting in the shadows, leaving clues only the brave can uncover. Tommy's disappearance may have started as a story of loss, fear, and unanswered questions, but the attic's secret turned it into a lesson, a reminder of how fragile life can be, how easily the ordinary can conceal the unimaginable, and how the echoes of the past can reach across decades to shock us in ways we never expect. And so, as the sun sets over Elm Street and the town finally breathes a sigh of relief, the house remains, standing, silent, and patient. For those who dare to look closely, to explore, or even just to remember, its shadows still whisper the story of a boy who vanished, and the attic that finally refused to keep its secret any longer.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.